Hi, everybody. This is Harrison Klein, and I am here with one of my favorite, amazing people on the planet. He's so brilliant. He's so wonderful. He's incredible. He's one of my great heroes. I have taken his classes. I have been with him. I have had good times with him, and this has been an amazing relationship since I've met him. Probably be like 2006 or something like that. And the truth is that 80% of what I have learned and evolved into has come through some information that I've gotten from Dr. John Demartini. So I want to present him to all of you who may or may not know him. If you know him, you know his brilliance. If you don't know him, you're in for a huge treat. So we're going to have some fun today, and we're going to talk about, the psychic element for our expo coming up. And one of the first things that we discussed to present on this program is the fact that there can be a difference, and there is a difference between the intuitive and the psychic abilities, and we're going to let John kind of go from there. So John, welcome. I am so privileged and happy to have you here. So we're going to just do some great stuff and make a big difference today. So yeah, okay. How you doing?
Thank you, Harrison. And hi everyone who's at the this expo, because I know that you're obviously intuitively led there, and you know that this is the thing to be at. I've been teaching over 48 years now, and about 48 years ago, almost 48 years, in just a few months, I was I guess I was interested in the psychic phenomena, the paranormal phenomena. I was fascinated by it, and so I eventually do with most things, I start to investigate it. And I read about the Rhine studies, and I read about Edgar Cayce, and I started going down the classical route that many people have probably taken. And then I wanted to know, what exactly is this? Later in my life, I ended up marrying a very mystical lady named Athena Starwoman, who was definitely an intuitive. And we ended up having the opportunity to have 1,700 psychics in 4 major countries on psychic lines that we were involved in training. And we had about 400 of them on live 24 hours a day. And so we got a good sense for the ones that were really powerful mediums and others that were kind of neophytes on the journey, learning. And so I'd like to share with you some of what we had the opportunity to learn from that experience. And also a little bit about the thing called intuition and the psychic capacities. Now, some of this may not be new to you because you probably explored it for years yourself, but I'd just like to share what I did find in case that could be helpful. First of all, I'm going to use maybe a few stories along the way. Most likely in your life, you've had moments in your life where you have been enamored, infatuated, and put somebody on a pedestal a bit. Maybe they were a hero of yours, or maybe just somebody that you were highly attracted to from a perspective of a relationship. And when you did, you tend to put them up on a pedestal and became conscious of their upsides, but kind of blinded and unconscious of some of their downsides. And if you were really, really, really infatuated with them, you tended to minimize yourself to them and felt a little intimidated and a little awkward. And you tend to sacrifice what was really important to you to be with them, giving up some of the time and energy of things you normally did to try to fit into their world for fear of loss of them. Because whenever we're infatuated with something, we fear its loss. And so we tend to minimize ourselves to people we put on a pedestal and exaggerate. So if we exaggerate them, we minimize us. And when we minimize us, we're inauthentic. And when we do, we self-depreciate.
Yes.
And when we do, our blood glucose and oxygen goes into our amygdala, and we go into our animal brain, which is not the real source of our psychic capacities. It's sort of a psychotic capacities more so than a psychic capacities. We also side. We meet somebody that we just don't, they're reminding us of something that we've been wounded by in the past in our subconscious mind. And we look at them and we look down on them and resent them. And we're conscious of the downsides, unconscious of the upsides, and kind of put ourselves up on a pedestal and look down, and We're now too proud to admit what we see in them is inside us. And we exaggerate us and minimize them. And now we're exaggerating ourselves, which is inauthentic. And again, we're back in our amygdala. We're now in a fight or flight response and defense. And whenever we do that, we're again inauthentic. And again, we're shutting down our real psychic capacities, our real, true, powerful capacities. Anytime we're inauthentic, anytime we exaggerate or minimize ourselves, we lose ourselves. And we are, in a sense, in a psychosis, a psychotic behavior, not a psychic behavior. A true psychic behavior is an honorable, authentic state of grace, a real presence.
Yes.
Now, what I found is that the second we have reflective awareness and we see that the seeing, the seer and the seen are the same. Right. And we have a reflective awareness. We don't put people on pedestals. We don't put people in pits. We put them in our heart. And we have a moment of love and a moment of gratitude and grace for them. We get a tear of gratitude. And we now access our true psychic, authentic state. And that's amazingly profound. We're able to see things, hear things, sense things. We have many vehicles of accessing this state. So our most authentic, most inspired, most present, most graced state is really the psychic state, the real psychic state, not the psychotic assumptions. Now, I'd like to talk about intuition for a second. When we are infatuated with somebody and we're unconscious of the downside, our intuition is whispering to us, trying to say, too good to be true. We got to keep our eyes open for the downside. So our intuition is trying to bring our unconscious up to match our consciousness so we have full consciousness. Because a true psychic ability is full awareness, full consciousness. You're picking up on all cues, not subjectively biased cues when we're down in our amygdala, where our animal survival instincts and impulses are. When we're in our forebrain and we're in our intuitive state where we're listening to the unconscious and bringing it conscious, that's what our intuition is about. Our intuition is attempting to make us aware of that which we're blinded to in our first initial perception.
Right.
Now, when we resent somebody, our intuition is also now looking for the upsides. That's why we say when something happens that we think is terrible, we first initially label terrible, which it's not, it's just an event, but we labeled it that way because of our bias. We then go, there must be a purpose behind this, got to be meaning to this. What's the upsides to this? Now, Aristotle talked about this in his extracting meaning out of the universe by finding out the mean, the balance between the pairs of opposites. So the true psychic capacity is awakened intuitively when we start out judging things and putting people on pedestals and pits, and in compensation, putting ourselves in pits and pedestals. When we're inauthentic, our intuition is trying to take us back to authenticity by revealing to us that which takes us back to the mean, the golden section of awareness, you might say. And it is that intuitive state that is leading us back to the inspired state, the authentic state, which we then access the amazing capacities of clairaudience, clairvoyance, and presence with people. And that's where we start to synchronize our minds with what's accessible through theirs. And this is where we have the gift, we access it. This is where the human will now matches divine will. When the contingency now matches what they call necessity. This is when all of a sudden you have no desire to change you relative to anybody, no desire to change anybody relative to you. There's nothing to fix. There's just something to be graced about. In that spiritual state, the authentic state of appreciation, love for life, is when we access an incredible ability to know. We're not in a state of uncertainty and wobbling with emotions. We're in a state of grace. And that's our true spiritual nature. So our psychic capacity can be refined and masterfully skilled by trusting our intuition to a state of grace. And that's the first thing I just wanted to mention. That, and what's interesting is the brain, your magnificent brain, has homeostatic feedback mechanisms designed to take chemistries and electronics that are out of balance when we're emotional and synthesize them and bring them into a balanced state, which is that grace state. And when we're in a state of gratitude or grace, gracias, that's the key that opens up the gateway of the heart. And inside the heart is love. And inside the love, when it comes radiating out, it inspires the mind and brings enthusiasm to the body and brings presence and certainty. And that's when our skill is masterful and literally magnificent in its ability to be able to tune in and in a sense, access information, a new sphere of information, a new celestial awareness, if you will, a broader perspective. I always say at the level of the essence of our soul, nothing's missing in us. At the level of the existence of our senses, things appear to be missing in us. And the things that are appearing to be missing in us is the things we're too proud or too humble to admit we see in others inside ourselves. So when we judge, we shut down our real psychic capacities. When we love, we wake it up. That's why our real nature, our authentic nature, is an expression of love on this planet. That's our greatest service. And we all have that capacity to express a divine nature in this human experience, this existential world that we live in, when we're actually not judging things on the outside, but honoring the wisdom and the intuition and the inspiration, the voice and vision on the inside, when it's finally louder than all extrinsic illusions on the outside. That's when we wake up our true psychic capacities.
It's a simultaneous inward and outward awareness. So
it's an interperception, simultaneously with an honoring of the what's actually out there, not what we thought was out there, but it's actually
right.
there.
So there is a reality that is perceived, and then there's a reality that's invented, and there's a reality that is. So
you're accessing what is.
That's right.
In the Gita, they said that the Tat Sat, as it is, not as it you wish it would be, or hope it would be, or wanted it to be, or what you thought it would be.
Right. And so the access of as it is the knowing portion of it. So there's no distance between what we think and what we know. We experience it as it is, as it really is. So yeah.
Exactly.
And so this awareness that is activated through intuition and kind of, would you say focus is a big part of it? Or because I know when the energy comes together, you're automatically concentrated and focused. But for those who want to kind of, achieve a state of grace, how important is the focus area and concentration and seeing the intuition and trying to, get to it? Because I know you don't have to get to it when you're there, but
when you're infatuated with somebody, they occupy space and time in your mind. You can't get them out of your mind when you're highly infatuated. And so you're distracted by a misperception of that infatuation that's imbalanced.
And all suffering is a misperception, right? All suffering is misperception.
All suffering is misperception. We suffer when we fear the loss of that which we infatuate with, and we fear the gain of that which we resent. Our philics and phobics are a result of our misperceptions. So the second we exaggerate somebody and put them on a pedestal, they're going to occupy space and time in mind and distract us from being present. The second we resent somebody, we're going to do it. For the moment we judge, and we're back in our amygdala, our impulses and instincts override our intuition, and we distract ourselves as a survival mechanism. And this is not where we're not in that. It's not an animal psychosis. We want a human psychology, you might say, as human psychic abilities. And that comes when we actually rebalance our perceptions. And so as long as we have an imbalanced perspective, we're going to be distracted and unfocused. We'll be, in a sense, distracted by illusions on the outside instead of present with the knowing on the inside, the certainty of the inside.
And is there a methodology that gets you there, or is there, how do we develop these powers so that they are sharp and clear?
Well, there's many different methodologies. I mean, there's the ancient art of meditation that helps people. There's training yourself and being present. If you're focused on your client and you're present with them, you're not distracted by your own judgments. You're present with them. So if you fill your day with the highest priority actions, which is service to the clients, you have the highest probability of being focused. It's when you're thinking about yourself and you're judging yourself relative to other people that you've just lost your psychic abilities. We watched this on the psychic lines. We could tell. And with the ratings on the psychic lines would show perfectly well how present people were. The ones that were really amazingly present, they had callbacks and they got referrals, and it just grew spontaneously. And the ones that didn't, people didn't want them again. They would get off the line. You could tell, because there's no presence in the individual. But yeah, if we go in there and also ask questions and train ourselves. So if we're resenting something, if we ask what are the upsides, and if we're infatuated with something, what are the downsides, and balance it out and get back into the center, we can do that cognitively. So whether we do it cognitively to get back through it and train it so our intuition is strengthened, or whether we do it through meditation and do it patiently, passively, there are many vehicles, or whether we just focus on serving somebody. When we really, 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 I had a woman that was emotionally, really distracted, really very angry and frustrated with her boyfriend one time. And all of a sudden the doorbell rang, and all of a sudden she got herself present with what was happening at the door. I said, well, isn't it interesting? You were completely out of control until the doorbell rang. And so you always have the capacity to get present. And she now had a motive to do it. So if we fill our day with the quality dedication to the service of serving somebody with our skills, we are increasing the probability of not being distracted by things that stop the psychic capacity.
So there are triggers that help you get into the present, right? So especially what this story you just said, the doorbell rang and she became present. So there are triggers about how much you like something, how much you dislike something, or whatever the case may be. And a trigger can put you into the center of your being so that you are in this presence. And, you can read things in the present that you couldn't read in the amygdala brain or on either side, because part of your brain is being held for danger purposes or other kinds of, intentions, whatever those may be, good, bad, or indifferent or ugly. But yeah, so what are some of the triggers? Now, I know that when we read people, when they do tarot readings and they do, past life readings and they do all these things, there is a certain kind of thing that gets triggered both in the recipient and in the reader. So as you said before, the seen, the seeing, and the seer is the exact same thing. So let's talk about that.
Well, the only way the seer, the seeing, and the seen, which we can trace all the way back to the pre-Socratic Greeks, the discussion of this, the only way that's going to be the same is not in a judgment state. If you're judging something and you're philic and infatuated or phobic and resentful to something, you can't access that state because you're automatically above or below it.
Yeah, because you're pulling energy out of it, right?
You're out of that and back in your amygdala. It is an objective state, actually. And yeah. It's not an intellectual state.
No, it's not the mind.
It's a synthesis of the dialectic, as Zeno would describe it. It's the synthesis. It's the two sides synchronously at the same time. The brain there was a gentleman, Wilhelm Max Wundt, who was a psychologist at the time of William James. And he said there's a thing called the law of contrast. And the law of contrast says that whatever you're perceiving, its equal and opposite is always present. But if you're present with both of them, you're in a state of grace. If you're not, you're in a state of judgment. And we subjectively filter our reality many times because of our biases when we're down in our amygdala, and we take away our biases and we go back into the forebrain. When we go into the forebrain, we are foresight. We have foresight. We can sense things. We can know things. We can calculate things. We can do incredible intuitive assessments and be present with people. We can't do that in the lower brain centers because it's back into fight or flight. It's back into survival mechanisms. So it's a living by priority that allows you to wake up your psychic capacities. And the highest priority thing for a psychic, in my opinion, the ones that we found it in our 1700 psychics, the ones that were really felt they had a mission to serve, they're the ones that had the highest probability of that stability, highest probability of presence. And the ones that were doing it as a job and just on the side and they weren't really present with it, they couldn't access the state consistently because they were distracted by their personal life and all the judgments that they were storing. So prioritizing your life and focusing on serving people and mastering the skill and refining the skill and making a reproducible system that you want to commit to, and metric, and look at what's working and what's not working, and really commit to mastering the skill, is what made the two ladies. We had two that were phenomenal. They could remote view. They were able to access information. It was mind-boggling. And they were the ones that have been doing it 37 to 43 years. And they really made a reproducible, duplicatable refinement of their own skills as they went along. It wasn't just a hunch. It was a mastery of the skills over time, and the mastery of being present with people. And they really, really loved doing it. They could do it 15 hours a day. They loved their work. This is, if it's something that you're real called to do, you can wake up this skill much more efficient, because it's really a priority to you.
Yeah, and it is an awakening, right? Would you classify it as an awakening?
Yeah, you're awakening your full conscious awareness to what is, instead of filtering it. You have a pulvinar nuclei in the thalamic area of the brain that filters things based on your past experiences and judgments. If you're caught in that, you're going to be down in the subcortical areas of the brain and not access the great powers. But the second you get past that and you actually love again, and you're inspired by what you're doing, and you're present with your client, you're not there. You don't filter. You're actually able to activate and become aware of all kinds of subtleties that are going on in their body language, their physiology, their movements. There are a tremendous amount of senses, over 110 senses we now know exist, that we're using and combining and gestalt integrating in the psychic awareness. It's not some mystical thing. It's actually a culmination of the integration of how that brain and how that mind works, and how we access an inspired state, and we enter into a spiritual domain that we now have awareness, full gestalt awareness.
Now let's take a little reversal here for a second. Let's take it from the position of those people receiving readings and things like that. How does that work? How do these readings work? And then how do the people who receive the readings, like tarot or numerology or astrology readings, how does that basically work for the person receiving and stuff?
Well, whoever the individual is, their receptivity to that tool will give physiological feedback to the medium. And then that medium will sense that, and if they know how to not judge that response and stay present, they'll melt any resistance or any distortion that the other one that the actual client is trying to portray. Because sometimes they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear what that is. They don't want to believe that or something. And so if you are reacting and judging them, and you're in a pride mode where you have to be right, you automatically stopped your psychic powers. But if you're just there and you're fluid, you're water, you're like in Bruce Lee, he said you have to be water if you want to be a master martial artist. If you're completely fluidic and you're not reactive to them, you can actually transform their resistance into being present with you. And that's when you both get the most out of the reading.
And actually, oftentimes when you're able to do that, don't you actually slow time down to see much more? The time factor gets slowed, and it's malleable to begin with, and now you slow it down so that it becomes discernible in every way. So you're able to actually decipher what is happening in a very, very profound way.
Well, I like to think of it this way. Einstein said it really well in his general relativity. He said that when you're kissing a girlfriend, 2 hours zips by like 2 minutes. When you're waiting for a freight train, 2 moments seems like 2 hours. But when you're actually in a state of grace, there is no time. You've extracted space and time out of your mind, and you're just present. There is no time there. There's no entropy, the arrow of time, or aging in that moment. A true psychic capacity is a timeless mind, ageless body, as Deepak used to say. And that is a grace state. And there's a reverence for it. So if you're not getting a reverence and a presence in the client, it's because somehow you're probably not in that state, the grace state yourself. Because I find that when you're there, when you're really in the grace state, your client is dumbfounded. It's like, whoa, they're like blown away by what's being stated. And I think I think every psychic medium knows when they're on and when they're not. And when they're really on and they're in that flow, and they're in that zone, you might say, they even amaze themselves on what's coming through.
So what then becomes the experience of receiving this for somebody who's getting a reading, somebody who's getting a, an Akashic record experience, somebody who's getting a numerological experience? What does that actually wake up in them? What does that actually do for them?
Well, it depends on depends on what they're asking for and what they're starting from, what that might be. It might be a resolution of a conflict, an internal conflict. It may be a direction and clarity about what they want to dedicate their energies to. It may be a aha, and they understand now why they're in the relationship they're in. It depends on what their reason for being there is and what is discovered in that, what that might lead to. I don't know what that is because I've seen it affect economics, relationships, business transactions. I've seen it go in different directions based on what's being found and discovered. But what it usually brings is a tear of gratitude. If it's done,
does it need an
intent? Because it resolves some internal challenge or conflict or concern or question that they're facing.
Does the one being read have to have an intent for the resolution?
Not necessarily. They may not even know what their primary intent is. They just have this sense that this intuitive reading would be useful to them, and they're not necessarily cognizant of what that main motive is. I've had it where somebody's done a reading and they just nailed something, and it wasn't what I was expecting. And I had I was in left field with what I was kind of thinking about in my mind, and it came out something else. Went, whoa, it was expecting that one. So I can't say that it's always requiring that you have a clear intention what you're going in there. But whatever is, if you're really present with somebody, their own expression of what's meaningful to them surfaces, and it usually get the answers you need. It may not be what you had intended, but it may be what you need.
Right. So let me detour here for a second too. There are a lot of very famous psychics, and they read things like, dead people that are around people and things of that nature. Can you explain a little bit of that ability to see the other side, or areas that would not be normally accessible to the person being read, and so on?
Well, that's an interesting thing. Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher, said that we had what is called the transcendent mind and the immanent mind. Some people called it the higher mind. William James called it the higher mind and the lower mind. In biblical writings, I think it was Corinthians, it talked about the celestial body and the terrestrial body, or the celestial mind and the terrestrial mind. When we have a perfectly equilibrated mind, we access this immortal spiritual nature. And when we have this imbalanced thing, we access the mortal, physical, material nature, you might say. So we have both. If we're in a state of grace, we have access to this immortal, spiritual, psychic capacities. That transcends life and death, that part. And so I think we have access to information. I've certainly, in the program I've been teaching now for 32 years, the Breakthrough Experience, I've seen people access information. I'd like to share a story if I can. I had a lovely lady who was 57 years old, attend the Breakthrough Experience in Melbourne, Australia many years ago. And there was a young girl, her father was having to babysit her on the weekend and brought his daughter, who was 11 years old, to the program. The young girl was listening to music and playing and kind of in the corner and wasn't really engaged in the seminar most of the day. Occasionally she'd listen in, very polite, never really disturbing, just amazing young girl. But in the evening, after we finished the Demartini method, which is the method of resolving the conflict and entering into this transcendent state, the 57-year-old woman who had been resentful to her mother and was doing this methodology on resolving the anger with her mother, I asked her when she finally finished the process and had a state of gratitude and grace for her mother, I said, who in the room here reminds you of the mother could act as a surrogate that you could communicate your appreciation to your mother? And she looked around the room and back and forth, and finally she looked and she said, I don't know why, but this 11-year-old girl. So we brought this 11-year-old girl up in front of her, and they're sitting together across from each other, literally a foot and a half apart. And she starts to tell the 11-year-old girl about how she had misinterpreted her, her mother, and how she had been misinterpreted, and how much she appreciates and loves her mother. And it was just a real tear-jerking. Everybody in the room had a little tears of gratitude. It was a real heart-opening moment. And the 11-year-old girl reached across and started having a palsy in her left hand, and reached across and started stroking the hair of the 57-year-old woman. Wow. And said to the woman, because the lady was saying thank you, she says, "Oh, my dear precious little angel, I'll never forget the moment your eyes opened up and you were born. You've been my precious little angel your whole life, my dear. I can't tell you how much it means to me to hear what you say today. It means so much to me. Thank you for being my precious little angel." And she's sitting there stroking her hair with a palsy in her left hand, of an 11-year-old girl shaking in her hand, stroking her hair and calling her a precious little angel. And the lady's in tears. There was nobody in the room except snot. I'm talking about tears of gratitude and snot, going, whoa, right? Yeah. This lady, they're tuned in. They're in their psychic capacities right now. They're both resonant. And when she got through and they hugged, the 11-year-old girl, in a real gentle pat on the back of the woman, said, just like you could swear you were talking to a 76-year-old woman, looking and watching her. She was just tapping really gently on it like that, and stroking her hair and touching and holding her just like a mother. Yeah. When we came out of it, the 57-year-old woman looked at me and she goes, "Whoa, that was my mom." Yeah. And she said exactly what my mom used to say, and used the wording, precious little angel. That's what my mom called me my entire life. Yeah. How did an 11-year-old girl know to say that? Right. Yeah. So when we access and get present and get in a state of grace, this is something that I see every single weekend in the breakthrough experience. I watch this every weekend doing this. And this kind of state occurs. And so that part doesn't die. Our subconscious mind stores all our judgments, but our superconscious mind, our soul, if you will, stores our love and wisdom. I was told by Howard Hughes when I was 14, there's only two things they can never take away from you in your life, and that is your love and your wisdom, and gain the wisdom of love and the love of wisdom. When we have the love and wisdom of the order, the implicate order that's ever present, and see things as they really are, not as we skew them with our misperceptions, we access this capacity. We all have it to be able to tune in. And that part, the immortal part of us, is the love part of us. And that we have access to, and that doesn't have a limitation on the form. That's transformative. Transformative. Yeah. Really, yeah. I've been to the Great Breakthrough Experience more than once, and I have been in multiple classes where tears were broken down everywhere. So, you do a great job in getting people really present there. It's a significant experience for everybody who's in these events. Can I share another story? Can I do another? Yeah, please. Yeah, we got enough time. Yeah. I was in Hawaii at the Hyatt Hotel there in Waikiki, Hyatt Regency. And we were doing the breakthrough experience there, and it was about 20 minutes to midnight. And all of a sudden, this one lady had finished her process, opened her heart to somebody she had a charge on, and was about to pack up and get home because she wanted to go and take care of her dogs because it was running late. It's midnight. And I put my hand up. I said, please, if you could just wait another 20 minutes until everybody's finished. That was the agreement. And that is the agreement with all of your breakthrough experiences. Yeah. Yeah. Because we sometimes go wee hours in the morning. I don't care how long. I've been there where it's go 3 and 4 in the morning. Yeah. I just want to get a job done. I don't care how long it takes. But anyway, this lady agrees, but she's sitting there with her purse on her shoulder and ready to go, waiting. So you can see she's not really wanting to be there. She wants to go home to her dog because she's afraid her dog is going to poo on the ground because he hasn't been let out. So right. in the process, there's a 19-year-old girl there that's attending. And the 19-year-old girl is doing the Demartini method on her mother. And she finishes 12 minutes or so after this lady asked to leave. And she picked this lady to be her mom. And so I asked her, I said, can you be her surrogate, her mom now? And when the moment she got picked, she started bawling, this lady. And I said, well, obviously there's something. We kind of looked at it. Obviously there's a resonance here. So she walks over, they sit literally face to face with each other, 1.5 feet away. And this 19-year-old girl said things to her that this lady needed to hear, because her daughter left 3 years earlier and she hasn't heard from her daughter in 3 years. This woman, this 19-year-old girl, left home 3 years earlier and had been angry with her mom and just resolved it and just communicated with her mom. And in that moment, when she communicated with her mom, she said exactly what this mom needed to hear from her daughter. And they're both bawling and hugging each other. It was the most amazing thing. When she got through, she looked at me and she goes, and then comes over to me and hugs me. She says, thank you for making sure I didn't leave. I would not have missed that for the world. I swear to God, I was with my daughter just now. That was the most amazing present experience. She goes home, and this was 12:08, right? This is about 12:08 in the right after midnight when they're sitting there embracing each other. She gets home, and at 12:08, her actual daughter contacted her at that moment because of the non-local kind of an entangled dynamic that goes on when you love somebody. And her daughter said, I'm coming home. Yeah. And so she called her daughter immediately and said what she wanted to say to her daughter that she said to the girl. And the daughter said what the daughter said, the lady said in the seminar. And she came back the next morning. She says, you're not going to believe what just happened. What I said to my daughter last night, the girl said my daughter said what the girl said last night. I said, I know. See, we all have this aspect. It's in our state of grace that we access it to the fullest. Yeah. And we judge things and hold ourselves back and get caught in our amygdala instead of get forward into our forebrain and our accessing our real inspirational state.
And you know that the state of presence is really, I've always contended that it's magical. It is magic. So
it is the magic. It is the real magic, not the fake magic, not the illusionist. The real magic. It's the real transcendental magic that Eliphas Levi referred to.
That's right. So, you know, I also had a similar experience at one point where I had a surrogate and with my mother type situation. And the moment that I chose this woman, I went in one direction. I was walking because I had to go to the men's room, and this woman comes racing across the room, a huge room. She comes racing along. Harrison, I love you. And starts pinching my cheeks. So that's not the mother I knew. I didn't grow up with that woman, but you know, it was like there's no doubt that was my mother. I mean, I could see it in her eyes. I could see it in her physiology and everything else. You know. But she goes all that kind of stuff, and I was just like, totally wow.
Well, I've had it in the programs. In 2008, in August, I had this woman that she did her process on her son, and there was a man in the room that looked. I mean, if you took pictures, you go, they're identical. And then he brought out a picture of his mom, and it looked identical to her. It was spooky.
Yeah, I bet.
What they said and the synchronous lives that they both had was mind-blowing. Both were bodybuilding sons. Both mothers were teachers. And the whole room is just like going, whoa. When you see these synchronicities, it's so inspiring. So we all have this capacity. When we're authentic and we're really living by priority and inspired by our lives and are dedicated to our service of being, you know, the medium, if you will. The medium is really our communion with the divine inside ourselves. That's the medium. And when we do that, we have access to our real psychic power. That's the message.
I believe 30 years from now, we will all have the same metaphysical information that people like you and I and many other people out there who are really into this stuff have. I think every school child will know it in the same way that every school child knows telephones, smartphones, and computers now. You know, they know a lot more than I do, you know, and they're like, you know, 6, 8, 5 years old and stuff like that.
Well, I read an article this morning talking about the depressive medications and how ineffective they are, and how epigenetics is now becoming more a factor. And now they're admitting that that it seems like mastering our own perceptions has the best way of governing the epigenetics for our brain to change our transmitters. The greatest pharmaceutical is not an external pharmaceutical, it's the internal pharmaceutical.
Yeah.
And that's
Always.
grace and love are still the greatest healers and bring us back into real authenticity. So I think our psychic capacity is a reward for authenticity.
I want you guys out there listening and watching to this thing to just come to the understanding that we are passing on the light of human consciousness, that each of us passes on the light of human consciousness to everybody else. So the better your access to who the self, the true self is, the better your ability to communicate, the better your ability to have connection, and the better your ability to feel at your highest level. So John Demartini is a exceptional, articulate person of this nature. So I hope you guys have learned a great deal here, because I sure have. And and I study this stuff. So every time I talk to him, it's a new insight. I want you guys to also understand that the light of human consciousness is you, as well as. So we are just expressing what is transpiring between us. So everybody listening to this is also experiencing the same thing. So hopefully you guys will be at the virtual Psychic and Healing Expo. John will be a presenter there, one of the headliners, and I can't wait to get you guys connected to him for some Q&A and other things like that. So this man runs a breakthrough experience every weekend. He does incredible stuff in retreats, or at least classes of different sorts. I just want you to get in touch with him if you can as well. John, give him your email or whatever it is, or your website URL that you want them to touch. Just
drdemartini.com.
drdemartini.com. And I hope you guys have really learned something and enjoyed this, because I sure have. And I sure love you guys, and I love John, and I can't wait to share as much of this as possible. And I'd like you guys to share as much of this as possible. Please share.
Please give yourself permission to do something extraordinary on the planet. The true you is an extraordinary being.
Always.
The magnificence of who you are is far greater than any fantasies you'll ever impose on you. So give yourself permission to shine.
And if you can feel the love, and you can feel the love that goes on between John and I right now, that love is also inside of you. So it's amazing. So very cool. Thank you, John Demartini, for coming today.
Thank you, Harrison. Thank you, everyone.
Always. Okay, thank you.